The snow came down thick that Christmas Eve in Hallows End, muffling the quiet town beneath a white hush. Wreaths adorned each door, flickering candles sat on windowsills, and chimneys poured out trails of smoke. The year was 2005, and families were gathering in coats and scarves, making their way toward the town's oldest structure, St. Matthias Church, for midnight mass. Inside, the church glowed with soft golden candlelight. The pews filled with familiar faces, wrapped in scarves and seasonal cheer. Carols drifted through the nave as incense hung in the air like fog. At the center of it all stood Pastor Jonathan Clay, flanked by his wife Evelyn and their 10-year-old son Benjamin. Benjamin was the kind of boy who made people smile without realizing it. Quiet but inquisitive, with a habit of asking impossible questions, he carried an old book of riddles wherever he went. He sat in the front pew, legs swinging, his mittens tucked into his coat pocket, his gaze occasionally drifting up to the towering altar where a life-sized nativity stood. The service went on, filled with scripture and song, as the clock approached midnight. As the final hymn began, "O come all ye faithful," the lights in the church flickered once. A hush fell over the congregation. Some gasped, others clutched their coats. Pastor Clay continued with calm determination, raising his voice in verse. But then a sound, softer than the music, stranger than the wind. A faint whisper. It seemed to rise from the floor itself, unnoticed by most, save for one or two who turned their heads, and just as quickly, it vanished. When the final note of the hymn echoed into silence, Evelyn turned toward Benjamin's seat. He was gone. At first, she assumed he had simply slipped away to the restroom. She whispered to her husband, who gave a soft nod and resumed the final prayer. But minutes passed, then more. He did not return. Evelyn stood, walked quietly out into the aisle, scanning the crowd. Her heart thumped louder than the carols. Still nothing. After the dismissal, panic erupted. Dozens of people combed the church, calling Benjamin's name. Volunteers searched every corner, every room, every pew. His coat still lay draped on the seat, but his shoes were gone. Only a pair of woolen mittens lay folded neatly near the back pew, far from where he had been sitting. Pastor Clay's voice trembled as he called out to his congregation, pleading for anyone who might have seen his son. One child, a young choir boy, claimed he saw Benjamin near the altar, talking to someone in smoke. No one took it seriously. Others mentioned a strange chill when the lights flickered, but it was the middle of winter, and fear plays tricks on the mind. The police were summoned. Officers questioned every attendee. No security cameras, no witnesses, no signs of forced entry or exit. The church doors had remained locked from the inside the entire time. No footprints in the snow outside, but those of parishioners arriving. It was as though Benjamin had simply vanished. The town of Hallows End was stunned. For weeks, search parties scoured the forest and lake surrounding the town. Flyers went up. National news picked up the story. But nothing, not even a shoe print. The ground had frozen solid, and whatever clues might have existed were erased by ice and time. Rumors spread quickly in the absence of answers. Some claimed it was an abduction, that someone in the congregation had orchestrated the perfect crime. Others spoke of older, darker stories, whispers of the land beneath the church being sacred and sealed, that the foundation was laid over something that should have never been disturbed. By New Year's Day, the media had moved on. The search was scaled back. The police, after exhausting every lead, reluctantly labeled it a missing persons case. Benjamin Clay's name joined a long list of unsolved disappearances. Pastor Jonathan and Evelyn were never the same. Their home, once warm and filled with laughter, fell into silence. Evelyn stopped playing the piano. Jonathan continued to preach, his sermons growing more somber with each passing Sunday. The congregation dwindled. The Christmas decorations stayed up until March untouched, and Benjamin's bedroom remained just as he left it. Books stacked on the nightstand, a half-finished puzzle on the floor, and a small wooden cross hanging above the bed. His father refused to remove his shoes from beneath the chair by the window. Before we go further, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Because 2 decades later, something is about to be discovered, something that will force this quiet town to confront what truly happened that night, something that begins where it all ended, at the steps of the altar. The days that followed Benjamin's disappearance moved like slow, suffocating fog. In the Clay household, time fractured. Evelyn wandered the halls in silence, barely eating, barely sleeping. Her piano, once the soul of the house, sat untouched, its keys collecting dust. Pastor Jonathan, though visibly broken, returned to the pulpit that Sunday, his voice brittle and raw. "I don't know where God was that night," he confessed to a sparse congregation, "but I know where my son should have been, and he wasn't." His words hung in the air like smoke. Some found comfort in his honesty, others left and never came back. In the first weeks, the town rallied. Neighbors brought food, lit candles on their porches, joined search parties into the forest and across the frozen lake. But as time wore on and the trail grew colder, something began to shift. People whispered. Suspicion crept through smiles. How does a boy vanish inside a locked church? Why was Pastor Clay the last one to see him? Why did Evelyn say the candles flickered before the hymn started? The church, once a haven, started to feel cursed. Parishioners stopped coming. Parents pulled their children from choir. Choir practices were cancelled indefinitely. Baptisms postponed. Weddings moved elsewhere. Only funerals remained. Jonathan kept preaching. Empty pews stared back at him. Still, he stood at the pulpit each week, delivering his sermons to fewer and fewer souls. He stopped referencing joy, stopped reading psalms. He spoke instead of patience in silence, of faith in shadows, of endurance. At home, Evelyn retreated into her room. Her presence became ghostly. She spoke only when necessary, her voice flat. One night, she took down the family portraits and placed them in a box in the basement. All except one, Benjamin's school photo, which she set on the kitchen table and stared at during her morning tea, her eyes red but dry. Jonathan kept Benjamin's room exactly as it was. Every Sunday night he entered, lit the small oil lamp on the windowsill, and sat in the wooden chair by the bed, reading from his son's favorite book of riddles. Outside their home, something unspoken began to settle over Hallows End, a quiet dread. As winter faded into spring, a few of the remaining parishioners noted strange occurrences inside St. Matthias Church. One woman, Mrs. Harrow, claimed she lit a prayer candle that wouldn't stay out. She blew it out 3 times. Each time it reignited. A young janitor named Marcus, who worked maintenance for the church, reported that one night as he cleaned the nave, he heard faint singing, children's voices, though no one else was in the building. When he checked the choir room, it was empty, the hymn books closed and untouched. Others mentioned feeling cold in places that should have been warm. The organ played a single note by itself on Easter morning. And on the eve of Pentecost, Pastor Clay found 3 pews turned backward, facing the entrance rather than the altar. He didn't speak of it. He merely turned them back, swept the floor, and locked the doors. The police, though no longer actively investigating, checked in occasionally. But they had no answers, no suspects, no forensic evidence, nothing. One detail haunted Detective Langford, who had led the original investigation. The back door of the church had been bolted shut from the inside that night. Not just locked, but latched with the iron bar meant for emergencies only. There was no way a kid could have slipped out unseen unless he passed through walls. And then there was the choir boy's statement, which they had brushed aside at the time. "I saw him by the altar," the boy had whispered. "He was talking to a man. But the man wasn't really a man. He was made of smoke." When asked again, the boy retracted his statement, said he was confused. Said it was just the candlelight playing tricks. The church bulletin board remained untouched. The same announcement for midnight mass, yellowed and curling at the edges, stayed pinned above the old corkboard. Below it, a photo of Benjamin, smiling in his red scarf, stared back at every passerby. Whispers deepened. Some said the land beneath the church had a history. Others muttered that Pastor Clay had opened something with his grief. The theories varied wildly. A cult, a ghost, a sacrifice. None had proof, all had fear. Eventually, Evelyn left. She packed a single suitcase one morning and walked to the bus stop without saying a word. Jonathan watched from the porch, his hands gripping the railing. She didn't look back. That night, he sat alone in the church, staring at the altar where his son had last been seen. Outside, snow fell in soft spirals, though it was April. Inside, somewhere below the altar, a faint hum could still be heard if you listened closely, always at midnight. 10 years passed. The name Benjamin Clay faded from headlines, then from conversations, until only silence remained. The case remained officially open but inactive, a folder gathering dust in the archives of Hallows End Police Department. St. Matthias Church, once the town's beating heart, stood in a state of solemn neglect. Weeds grew around its stone steps, its once bright stained glass windows dulled with grime. The Christmas bells hadn't rung in years. Inside, Pastor Jonathan Clay still delivered sermons, though rarely to more than 5 or 6 souls. His voice had grown quieter, measured, like a man unsure if anyone was truly listening. The shoes beneath Benjamin's window remained untouched. Elsewhere, life continued. Children grew up, new families moved in, old ones moved away. People passed the church with quiet reverence, never speaking of what had happened, but always remembering. And then Claire Ramsey returned. Claire had grown up in Hallows End, 3 years ahead of Benjamin in school. She'd been away for over a decade, college, internships, then her work as an investigative journalist. She wrote for regional publications, often chasing cold cases no one else dared touch. When she returned home to care for her ailing aunt, she intended to stay only a few weeks, but the silence in the town unsettled her. The absence of children near the church, the way people changed the subject when Benjamin's name came up. She remembered the night of the midnight mass vividly. She hadn't been at the service, she'd been sick with the flu, but the news had shaken her just like everyone else. She remembered Evelyn's face on the news, pale and desperate, and Jonathan's voice cracking on the church steps. Something about it had never sat right. Claire decided to dig. Her first step was simple. She started asking questions. Old friends, neighbors, shopkeepers. Most were reluctant. Some offered vague recollections. A few recounted old rumors, most of them recycled versions of what she'd already heard, but a few details stood out. "Funny thing," said Mr. Denton, who used to run the local hardware store. "That night, it wasn't as cold as it should have been. Snowed, sure. But the air, it was warm. Unnaturally warm." Claire jotted it down. She spent evenings at the town library, poring through old newspaper clippings, church newsletters, and archived police statements. The official narrative was thin. No evidence of foul play. No signs of Benjamin leaving the premises. A 10-year-old simply gone. She obtained access to the police report under the pretense of writing a retrospective piece on local mysteries. The details chilled her. The iron bolt on the back door, the choir boy's testimony, still in the file, marked as unreliable witness. And then, buried deep in a footnote, altar inspection revealed no signs of tampering. Why would they inspect the altar? Claire returned to St. Matthias during the day, posing as a journalist researching the church's history. Jonathan Clay greeted her politely, though guarded. His hair was fully grey now and deep lines carved his face. He still wore his collar, still walked with slow, deliberate steps. "I'm not interested in revisiting the past," he said gently when she brought up Benjamin. "Not because I've forgotten, but because I remember too well." Claire nodded, respecting his boundary, but her curiosity deepened. That night, she slipped into the church alone. The door had no security. Inside, the air was heavy with old incense and the faint scent of dust. She approached the altar and stood in silence. Then, as her flashlight traced the edges of the marble, she noticed something odd. Tiny grooves in the stone, hidden just beneath the cloth. Not natural wear, symbols. Her breath caught. The next day, she returned to the church's old rectory, now used for storage. There she rummaged through forgotten boxes and unfiled church records. In a cracked leather journal, she found a passage that made her skin crawl. Sealed it must remain, the gate beneath, the threshold bound by fire and prayer. We offered light to keep it sleeping. To forget was to survive. The entry was unsigned. Dated 1811, Claire's research intensified. She reached out to state archives, university theologians, and folklorists. One name began to appear with alarming frequency: Father Alderic. According to the church's own history, Father Alderic was the founding priest of St. Matthias, sent from Europe in the 1700s. He was known for his obsession with ritual containment and abruptly disappeared in 1763. Some believed he went mad, others that he was excommunicated. But in one ancient homily he'd written, Claire found the phrase, "The altar weeps when the seal grows thin." Claire's hands trembled. What had been sealed beneath the church? And why had the altar been the center of it all? She didn't yet have answers, but the pieces were forming like frost on a window slowly clearing, and behind that frost, something waited. Claire's questions became less academic and more urgent. She returned to the church, this time requesting to interview Pastor Clay directly. He met her in his office, hands clasped, eyes sunken but sharp. She placed a copy of the journal entry from 1811 on his desk. His expression didn't change. "I thought this might interest you," she said carefully. He stared at the paper in silence. Then, after several long moments, he folded it and set it aside. "Some things," he said, "should not be pulled from the ground." She leaned forward. "Is that why you stayed all these years?" Jonathan didn't answer. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the frost-covered trees. "You want the story," he said. "I want peace. We are not looking for the same thing." That was the end of the interview, but Claire's resolve only grew stronger. She returned to the church at night. Her breath visible in the cold air, she sat quietly in the back pew, recorder in hand. Midnight approached. The candles had not been lit. The room was dark, save for the dim glow of the moon through stained glass. Then the organ hummed. Not music, just a single low tone. Sustained. Claire held her breath. The air changed, warmer suddenly, though the heater wasn't running. The silence deepened, and then she saw it, a shadow kneeling at the altar. Not a person, exactly. The outline of one. As if the light itself refused to touch it. She snapped a photo. The figure dissolved. She left immediately, heart racing, lungs tight. Back in her apartment, she opened the photo. The altar looked empty, until she increased the contrast. There, faint but undeniable, was the silhouette of a child. The next morning, Claire drove 2 hours to the county archives and requested historical records on Hallows End. There, tucked inside brittle folders, she discovered something alarming. In 1865, a boy named Elijah Tamson vanished during Christmas Eve services. In 1922, a girl named Mary Whitmore disappeared the same night, same location. In both cases, the children were last seen near the altar. Neither were ever found. In both incidents, the attending priest resigned within a month. In the margins of the 1865 file, someone had scrawled, "The seal holds, but not without cost." Claire sat frozen in her seat, chills tracing her spine. Back in town, she visited the old cemetery adjacent to the church. Among the tombstones, she found one half buried in moss. The inscription read, "Father Alderic, faithful to the end, 1732-1763. The question mark at the end of the date felt like a riddle. She touched the stone and whispered aloud, "Where did you go?" She didn't expect an answer. That night, she returned home to find her cat missing. All the windows closed, no sign of forced entry. She searched every room. No fur, no scratches. Just an odd smell lingering in the hallway, something like burnt sage and mold. Her sleep that night was fitful. At 3:11 a.m. she awoke, gasping. Her sheets were damp. Her heart raced with the lingering sense of being watched. She turned on the light and froze. On the edge of her bed, as if someone had sat there moments before, was a small pile of soil. Damp, fresh. She didn't sleep again. In the days that followed, things worsened. Claire found candle wax dripped on her doorstep. Her apartment filled with strange, sour scents that vanished by morning. In her recordings, whispers bled through beneath her own voice, always low, always unintelligible. Still, she pressed on. She tracked down descendants of the Whitmore family. An elderly woman in a nursing home, Mary Whitmore's niece, told her the family believed Mary had been taken by the bells. When Claire asked what that meant, the woman shook her head. "My grandmother said Mary heard music no one else could. Said she talked to shadows, we don't speak of her." Claire realized she was alone in this. No one wanted to remember. No one wanted the truth. But the deeper she dug, the more undeniable the pattern became. 3 disappearances, same date, same location, all 20 to 40 years apart, and always during midnight mass. A new idea began to form, a theory. Not about murder, not a kidnapping, a ritual. The term came to her unbidden as she looked again at the symbols etched in the altar. As she remembered the old texts and the fading journal entries, something had been sealed beneath St. Matthias, something ancient, and every few decades it demanded something in return. Claire made her decision. She would stay inside the church this year on Christmas Eve. She would see what waited in the dark. Christmas Eve returned to Hallows End with brittle winds and heavy snow. The town lay blanketed in white silence, its windows aglow, but Claire felt none of the comfort those scenes promised. Her focus was singular: the church, the altar, the truth. She slipped inside before dusk, hiding in the choir loft beneath a tarp of dusty robes. The air was frigid. She wore layers, gloves, carried a recorder, 2 flashlights, a thermos of coffee, and a camera slung around her neck. She didn't pray. She didn't breathe too loudly. She just waited. Time passed in muffled increments. The old clock above the pulpit ticked into the final hour. No service had been planned, midnight mass had not been held for years, but as the hour approached, something shifted. The church warmed, not from heaters, not from body heat. The warmth came unnaturally, pressing against the skin like steam rising from hidden stones. Claire remained still, eyes fixed on the altar. Midnight struck. The organ played a single, low note, then silence. Candles, untouched, flickered to life, one by one, an invisible breath igniting them. Shadows danced against the stone walls, warping the holy images in stained glass. Claire rose slowly. The camera in her hand trembled. She made her way down from the loft, her boots soft on the old wood, her pulse loud in her ears. She walked the center aisle, heart pounding, until she stood at the altar steps. There at her feet were a pair of small black shoes. She froze. They were pristine, polished. The laces still knotted in a child's fashion. Claire's mouth went dry. Her hands shook. Slowly she knelt and touched them. The leather was warm, no dust, no signs of age. She turned them over, on the left sole, faintly carved. B.C. Benjamin Clay. They hadn't been there hours ago. Behind her the pews groaned. She whirled around. Empty. Stillness. But something unseen had moved. The air felt heavy, charged. A voice whispered, soft, barely audible but unmistakable, "He waits beneath." Claire's breath caught. The voice wasn't behind her. It came from under the altar. She stepped back, shining her flashlight along the edges. Her beam caught a faint seam in the marble base, almost invisible. Her pulse quickened. The altar, once sacred, now seemed hollow. She backed away, breath unsteady. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed. What Claire finds next changes everything. The truth beneath St. Matthias is darker than any legend Hallows End has ever told. A sudden movement, a child's silhouette, small, slim, darted past the far edge of the sanctuary, vanishing into the floor. Not through a door, not into shadow, into the floor. Claire ran to the spot. Nothing, no opening, no trapdoor, just cold stone and candlelight flickering strangely. She stood there, heart in her throat. Benjamin. She whispered his name, as if it might pull him back, but the silence returned. Her flashlight dimmed, buzzed, then surged again. She looked around. The pews stood unchanged, the candles still burned, but the atmosphere had changed. The stillness was no longer peaceful. It was expectant. She snapped photos, the altar, the shoes, the marble seams. Then she picked up the shoes and cradled them in her arms, overcome by a sudden wave of grief. Grief not her own. Her vision blurred. A flash of memory, foreign, not hers. A boy standing in darkness, calling for someone. A voice answering in a tongue not spoken in centuries. A hand reaching out, grey, skeletal yet cloaked in priestly vestments. Then darkness again. She blinked, gasped, staggered back. The shoes fell from her hands, landing softly on the carpet. Claire knelt once more, this time with intent. She ran her fingers along the marble base of the altar, searching for a catch, a switch, a mechanism. And then, there. Her small indentation, hidden behind an old brass candle holder. Her thumb pressed into it, a soft click. Stone scraped against stone. Part of the altar's base shifted, revealing a narrow opening, a trap door, iron-edged, aged but intact. Her flashlight flickered again. Claire stared down into the darkness below. She had come for answers, and now they waited for her in the depths. What lay beneath the altar wasn't just history. It wasn't legend. It was waiting. Claire stood at the edge of the trapdoor, her breath visible in the strange warmth. The opening yawned beneath the altar like a secret the earth had tried to forget. With trembling hands, she aimed her flashlight down. A narrow spiral staircase descended into darkness, carved from stone and slick with age. She hesitated only once before stepping down. Each step groaned under her weight. The deeper she went, the colder the air became. Not winter's cold, but something older, the chill of forgotten things. Her light swept across rough walls, etched with symbols she'd seen before. Protective sigils, warnings. At the bottom, the staircase gave way to a low tunnel. The ceiling forced her to stoop. Dust thickened the air. She advanced slowly, flashlight shaking until the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Her breath caught. It was a crypt, but unlike any burial place she had seen. The walls were lined with niches, each holding objects instead of bodies. Small shoes, dozens of them. Old cracked leather, tiny buckles, faded laces, all neatly arranged. She stepped closer. Each pair was tagged with initials and dates. E.T. 1865, M.W. 1922, and others. Some names long forgotten. Some dates not even in official records. And then she saw them. B.C. 2005, Benjamin's original shoes. Her knees gave out. She collapsed to the floor, shaking, heart racing. Why were they here? If these were left behind, what had worn the shoes she'd found above? A sudden rustling. She snapped her light around, empty. Then a whisper, soft, childlike. "Claire!" She turned sharply, light landing on a pedestal in the center of the room. On it rested a book, leather-bound, brittle with age. She approached, hands trembling, and opened it. It was a journal. The first page read, Benjamin Clay. The dates inside were shocking, entries stretching far beyond 2005. Descriptions of days spent in the quiet place where meals that tasted like smoke, a sky that had no sun. His handwriting was unmistakably that of a 10-year-old, but the words grew older in tone. One entry stood out. He says I keep it quiet. He says I'm the seal. He sings to me. Sometimes I forget my name, but then I remember the shoes and I know I'm still me. Claire felt the room tighten. Air thickened. Her light flickered. She turned a page, a drawing, a face cloaked in grey, eyes like cracks in stone. The caption, "The man in silver. He talks through the bells." She slammed the journal shut. From the tunnel behind her came footsteps, slow, dragging. She ran. Twisting through the passages, she found another tunnel branching off. This one sloped downward, the walls smoother, colder. It led her to another chamber, larger, circular, lined with root-like tendrils of glass weaving through stone. At its center, a pod, or perhaps a cocoon, translucent, veined, pulsing faintly. Inside, it couldn't be. A boy, curled, suspended, unmoving, his face pale, untouched by time. Benjamin. Claire pressed her hands to the glass-like surface. It was warm. He looked as he did in photographs, No older, no different. Just asleep. Or not asleep. Preserved. A sound behind her. She turned, heart leaping into her throat. Nothing. She turned back and screamed. The pod had shifted. Benjamin's eyes were open. They looked at her. Confused. Afraid. "Help," he mouthed. She reached for him, but the pod trembled violently. The roots around it pulsed. The air thundered with a sudden hum, deep and resonant. Footsteps returned, closer. Claire spun around, light flashing across the tunnel. A shape emerged. Not a child. A man, but not quite. His robes were tattered priestly garb, his face sunken, eyes sunless. He moved with unnatural grace, as if the world bent for him. He raised a hand. Claire stepped back. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was layered, old, cracked and echoing. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice dry. He didn't answer directly. "He waits," he said. "He hungers. The offering weakens." Claire backed toward the pod. "I'm taking him." "You can't," the man said. "You'll break the seal." "Good. You don't understand what lies beneath the threshold." She raised her flashlight like a weapon. "I will," she said. And with that she turned and ran, knowing the way out would not be as simple as the way in. Claire moved quickly, but the tunnels twisted like a maze with no logic. Her flashlight barely cut through the thick dark, and the weight of the air seemed to press against her lungs. She could hear the man, if he was a man, following, but not rushing, stalking, as if he knew she had nowhere to run. She ducked into a narrow passage that sloped downward again. It opened into a new chamber, its walls lined with stone alcoves, each holding melted candle stubs, bones, and small wooden carvings. The carvings were faces, some screaming, some silent, some with their mouths sewn shut. A humming began, faint at first, then stronger. Not mechanical, not wind, a melody, Latin, a lullaby. Claire spun around, searching for the source. There, in the center of the room, standing perfectly still, was the man in priest's robes. His eyes were not lifeless as she'd thought. They were burning coals behind pale lids. "You know my name," he said, though she had never spoken it aloud. "Father Alderich," Claire whispered. He nodded once. "You bound it," she said. "You sealed the threshold." He looked at the floor. "It was the only way. It was never meant to be opened, not again." "What is it?" He raised his eyes to hers. "Not a demon, not a god. A hunger, a silence that eats." Claire shook her head. "Why the children?" "To hold it," Alderich said, voice steady. "It must sleep inside something that still breathes." Each child offered, willingly or not, slows the unraveling. She stepped back. "So Benjamin was sacrificed?" "No," Alderich replied. "He was chosen, not by us, but by it. We only maintain the cage." "Cage?" Her voice cracked. "He's alive. He remembers. He begged me to help him." "And if you do," Alderich said, "the seal breaks, the sleeper wakes, the threshold opens." Claire trembled. "You've been down here all this time?" "I don't age the way you think," he said. "Time does not pass here as it does above. I stay, I watch, I listen." "To what?" "To the pressure," Alderich said, "against the gate. When the boy's mind weakens, the barrier thins. He dreams of escape and the sleeper dreams through him." Claire backed further. "Then you've built a religion on this?" "A cult of silence," Alderich's voice rose. "No, we built a prison. The church above is the lock, the altar is the seal. The songs, the bells, the fire, rituals to keep it sleeping." She looked past him toward the direction she'd come. Her heart pounded. "I'm taking him out." "You cannot." She met his gaze. "Try to stop me." He didn't move, but the walls did. From the stone, long root-like tendrils stirred, glowing faintly with pulse-like rhythms. They throbbed in time with Claire's heartbeat. She turned to run, and the stone beneath her feet shifted. She fell, tumbling through another passage, landing hard in a narrow corridor. She groaned, scrambled up, ran. Behind her, the lullaby returned. A child's voice this time, weaving Latin phrases with broken pleas. The air changed again, thicker, warmer. A light appeared ahead, a blue glow, distant but real. Claire followed it. It led to a chamber unlike the rest. Smooth walls, polished stone, and torches burning with cold fire. At the center stood a dais with symbols carved deep into its surface. A circle, a triangle within it, a flame at the center. On the far wall, another door, massive, iron-bound, sealed with chains. Claire reached for the nearest torch, lifted it with shaking hands, and turned back toward the passage. She had no plan, only instinct. She followed the corridor again, retracing steps, calling Benjamin's name. No answer. Then, breathing. Her flashlight flickered. She aimed it down a side tunnel. There he was, not in the pod, standing, alive, Benjamin. He looked just as she remembered from the photographs, only his eyes seemed older, tired. "Claire," he whispered. She stepped forward. "I found you." "You shouldn't be here," he said. "He doesn't like visitors." "I'm taking you home." He shook his head slowly. "I can't leave." "If I leave, he follows." Claire dropped to one knee, touched his shoulder. "I'll find a way." Behind them, Aldrich's voice echoed. "There is no way." Claire turned to face him. "Then I'll make one." Aldrich stepped into the light, but his form was changing. His skin grew translucent, his features stretching, melting. His mouth opened wider than humanly possible, a scream with no sound. Claire pulled Benjamin behind her, torch raised. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing: she wouldn't run again. Claire didn't hesitate. With the torch held high, she swung it in a wide arc between herself and the thing that had once been Aldrich. The fire flared unnaturally, casting jagged shadows that twisted as if alive. The creature recoiled, not from the flame but from the light, its distorted body convulsing with each flicker. "Run," Claire told Benjamin. He hesitated, but one glance at Aldrich's unraveling face convinced him. They turned and sprinted through the tunnels, Claire gripping the torch tightly. Its flame guttering as air rushed past. The crypt trembled. Stones fell from above. The very walls seemed to pulse with rage. They reached the chamber with the sealed iron door. The ground quaked as if something beneath it was turning over in its sleep. Claire looked at the torch, then at the circle of runes etched on the floor. The symbols glowed faintly. "What is that?" Benjamin asked. "The seal," she said. "It's weakening." Cracks shot through the stone surrounding the altar chamber above. Far above their heads, the foundation of the church groaned. Something massive stirred beneath. The lullaby returned, no longer soft, no longer melodic. Now it was fractured, discordant, sung by many voices at once. Children, men, something else. Benjamin collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "He's inside," he gasped. "He's waking." Claire knelt beside him, gripped his face. "Look at me, just look at me. You're not his. You're real. You're here." His eyes focused. "I remember the snow," he whispered. "I remember my dad calling my name." She helped him stand. "Then let's make sure he sees you again." The chamber behind them exploded in light. Aldrich, or the thing wearing him, burst through, mouth stretched open, tendrils of black smoke lashing forward like whips. Claire shoved Benjamin forward. They dove into the corridor. The floor split beneath them. They tumbled through darkness, landing hard in another tunnel. Claire's torch had gone out. The smoke was chasing them, slithering through cracks, filling the air with rot. Claire fumbled for the flask of holy water she'd taken from the altar basin. Just before the shadow tendril reached her, she hurled the flask. It shattered. A flash of blue-white fire erupted, consuming the tendril in a shriek of vapor and ash. The smoke retreated. Benjamin coughed. "What was that?" "Faith," Claire said, not entirely sure what she meant. They moved fast. The tunnels were collapsing around them. The way back narrowed with each step. Every surface pulsed now, veins of crimson light running through stone. Claire spotted a flicker of moonlight, an opening. "The way out!" she cried. But as they reached the base of the spiral stairs leading to the altar, the ground exploded behind them. The sleeper rose. It didn't look like a creature. It looked like a void given form. Darkness wrapped in skin, its face a shifting mask of all the children it had ever held. Eyes of flame, hands that never stopped reaching. Claire turned. Torch reignited. She threw it, full force. The flame struck its chest, if it had one. For a moment the darkness recoiled. The church above cracked open with a sound like 1,000 bells shattering at once. Claire grabbed Benjamin's hand. They climbed the steps, the walls trembling violently. As they neared the top, a tendril wrapped around Claire's ankle and pulled. She screamed, holding the edge of the altar as Benjamin pulled from above. "Don't let go!" he cried. "I'm not!" she shouted, kicking furiously. Her foot connected with something solid. Another vial, the second flask she had taken, still in her coat. She yanked it free, broke it over the tendril. Holy water exploded like lightning. The tendril shrieked and released her. She tumbled onto the sanctuary floor, coughing, soaked, but alive. They didn't wait. They ran through the church as the floor behind them buckled. Candles burst. The stained glass shattered. The pews upended themselves like struck dominoes. They made it to the doors, pushed, fought against the pressure, and burst into the cold night. Behind them, the altar erupted in white light. A column of flame shot through the steeple. Then, silence. The church still stood, but the altar was gone. In its place, a circle of scorched stone. Benjamin fell to his knees, sobbing. Claire dropped beside him, wrapping him in her arms. The night was still, but nothing would ever be the same again. Dawn broke slowly over Hallows End. A pale sun crept across snow-laden rooftops, casting golden light over the silent town. But the silence that followed the events of the night before was different, heavier, reverent. The ground beneath St. Matthias no longer trembled. The altar was gone, reduced to scorched stone and ash. A perfect circle burned into the church's heart. Yet the building remained intact, as if spared deliberately. Inside, nothing moved. Outside, the townspeople gathered. Word had spread without anyone speaking. They came in robes and coats, hands shaking, eyes wide. And then they saw him, Benjamin Clay, alive. Wrapped in Claire's coat, barefoot in the snow, eyes blinking against the daylight. Pastor Jonathan was among the first to reach him. The old man dropped to his knees, arms outstretched, tears flowing before he could speak. "Benjamin?" His voice cracked like ice. The boy nodded once. "Hi, Dad." Jonathan pulled him close, sobbing into his son's shoulder. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He just held him, as if to stitch together the 20 years they had lost with the strength of his arms. The town watched in stunned silence. It didn't take long for word to spread beyond Hallows End. DNA confirmed Benjamin's identity. He hadn't aged a day, still 10 years old. Medical tests showed his cells were active, his body functional, but neurologists and psychologists couldn't explain his mental state. He remembered everything, the church, the altar, his parents, yet years in between were a haze of dreams and whispers. The town struggled to reconcile miracle with memory. Claire stayed at his side. She filed no articles, gave no interviews. She declined requests from networks and journalists. What she had seen was not for headlines. She submitted a simple report to the police, noting her role in Benjamin's reappearance. She didn't mention the sleeper, or Alderic, or the tunnel beneath. The official record would never hold the truth. Claire became Benjamin's legal guardian soon after. Evelyn returned from the coast. Her reunion with Benjamin was fragile but beautiful. She no longer cried. She simply watched him, learning his voice again, his laugh, the way he tilted his head when asking questions. The boy who had vanished into myth now rode his bike through town. And yet, not all was right. The townspeople cheered his return, but there were murmurs, too quiet to name, too vague to accuse. Some swore the ground still whispered at night. Others claimed to see flickers of light from the old crypt windows, though the entrance had been sealed with concrete. St. Matthias was never reopened. The steeple bell was removed. No Christmas Mass was held. And Benjamin, for all his youthful joy, refused to enter any church again. He said the ceilings echoed too loudly. At night, he would sit by the window, staring out into the darkness. Claire asked what he saw. "Not what," he would answer. "Who?" Pastor Jonathan stepped down from the pulpit weeks later. He never explained. He simply handed the keys to the church to the town council and walked away. He spent his days gardening, his hands always in the soil, as if to reconnect with something deeper, more real. Claire resumed writing, but not about Hallows End. She took assignments elsewhere, quiet pieces, personal stories. But one morning she found something strange. Her shadow was gone. It returned by afternoon. But every so often it would vanish again, just for seconds. And then there was the mirror. Her eyes sometimes glowed faintly in darkness. She told no one. Benjamin noticed, though. One evening he said, "You brought something back with you." She didn't answer. He nodded. So did I. And neither spoke of it again. Spring came early that year. Wildflowers bloomed in the graveyard behind the church. Birds returned weeks ahead of season. Some called it a blessing, others a warning. The scorched altar stone remained untouched. No one dared step upon it. One child claimed he saw someone standing there at night, a tall man in old robes just watching. When asked to describe him, the boy simply said, "He looked tired." The town slowly resumed its rhythm. School, work, coffee. But December was never spoken of, and as Christmas neared, people left town early. Stores closed, lights remained unlit. Only Claire and Benjamin stayed behind. The boy said, "If something wakes again, I want to be ready." Claire didn't argue. She simply said, "Me too." And in that silence, between the flicker of fear and the weight of survival, they understood each other completely. A year passed. Benjamin Clay walked through the halls of Hallows End Elementary for the first time in 2 decades. Though he hadn't aged, the building had. Everything felt smaller. Desks, lockers, even the sound of the bell. Yet it was his first day all over again. New friends, new teachers, but the same pair of eyes watching everything carefully. Claire waited outside after school, leaning against her car, arms crossed, cautious smile ready. Benjamin climbed in, tossed his backpack in the back seat, and stared out the window. "No voices today," he said quietly. She nodded. "That's good." He didn't answer, but she noticed the way he gripped the edge of the seat. His fingers still trembled sometimes. Claire continued writing, though her stories took on a sharper edge, darker, more thoughtful. She never wrote about Benjamin, never about the threshold. But in her mind, it never really ended. One afternoon, sorting through a stack of Benjamin's old belongings, things returned to the family by the town, Claire found his diary, not the one from the crypt. This one was newer, its leather still supple, the pages fresh. She flipped through it. The final entry chilled her. "Tomorrow he comes back. Don't be afraid of his smile, it's not his. But I think he forgot why he needs it." The entry was dated for the next day. Benjamin was outside playing with a soccer ball. She called to him. "Did you write in your journal?" He looked confused. "No, I haven't opened it in weeks." She showed him the entry. He read it. His expression darkened. "That's my handwriting," he said, "but I didn't write it." Claire closed the book. That night, Claire dreamt of the altar. Not how it had been, but restored, whole, untouched. And kneeling at its base, back turned, was a figure in robes. She called out, but the figure did not turn. Instead, it whispered something. When she woke, the window was open. Snow was falling. The next day, a stranger arrived in Hallows End. He wore a black overcoat, walked with a cane, and introduced himself as Father Emery, a traveling priest offering services to forgotten parishes. His face was gentle, kind, familiar. Too familiar. Claire spotted him in the town square, handing out tracts no one accepted. She watched from across the street, unease prickling her skin. That night, Benjamin came home pale. "He was at my school," he said. "He watched me at recess." Claire didn't hesitate. She found the man that evening, sitting on a bench near the church ruins, staring into the snow. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He smiled, eyes glinting. "I've always been here. You just didn't know where to look." "Who are you?" He tilted his head. "A reminder." She stepped closer. "Stay away from the boy." His smile widened, too perfect, too sharp. "I never left him," he said. "He carries my mark, so do you." Claire's hand burned suddenly. She looked down. A faint symbol, like the ones from beneath the altar, glowed on her palm, then vanished. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat beside Benjamin, watching as he dozed fitfully. His breath came shallow. At one point he murmured, "He waits beneath." Claire touched his hand, whispering a prayer she didn't know she knew. The next morning, Father Emery was gone. No one saw him leave. No one remembered him being there at all, except Claire and Benjamin. The snow melted early that spring. The altar site grew wild with grass and strange flowers. One morning, Claire noticed something blooming from the center, a single lily black as night. She uprooted it. That evening, her shadow disappeared again. Benjamin began drawing. He never showed the pictures. Claire found them hidden under his bed. They were of tunnels of the sleeper, of doors that looked like mouths. She burned the drawings, but the next day, they returned. Claire knew then. Some things weren't meant to be stopped, only paused, contained, and now something had shifted again. But they were not alone anymore. Jonathan returned to the altar ruins every Sunday, leaving offerings, bread, wine, coins. He never said why. He never missed a day. Claire and Benjamin kept watching, waiting, listening for the hum beneath the earth. And if you followed this far, make sure to subscribe, because what lies under Hallows End may sleep, but it never truly dies. And if you're ready for the next truth that should have stayed buried, click the video on your screen now.